Do you guys have questions or you want to take photos as well? All right, let's do it.
Sorry for questioning you, but I'm sure
What?
you're...
No,
sure
no,
you're-
I'm used to it.
I guess the thing I was talking a little bit about was, I know you're not a fan of, I'm not a fan of him either, but, Richie Torres sent a big letter, but...
Oh, God.
But in particular, there were some comments in there about sort of dismissing, a lot of people did feel very upset at the time, I remember seeing it, about dismissing Wham! October 7th as fantasy hallucinations. I mean, the UN has gone, checked, verified.
No, you know what's ironic?
For those comments?
You want to know what's ironic about that?
Yeah.
So that was a 17-second clip that Richie Torres got from a group of people that are trying to present this narrative that I am a vicious anti-Semite that is a denialist. And what's really interesting about that clip is that I went back because I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I went back and I looked at the 17-second clip that he put in that. And it was actually from a broader conversation where I was arguing against someone who was denying. And I was like, no, I think that there is a very high likelihood that sexual assaults occurred. And I even brought up the UN report that you're suggesting that that there was at least one documented instance of first-hand account testimony from one of the hostages that sexual assault had happened, and that there is no reason to disparage or to claim that it did not happen when there is at least evidence that it did. There is, however, evidence. There is, however, real evidence as far as like first-hand accounts and testimony, even second-hand accounts and testimony from hostages. So that part is real. That did happen, which is very important, and that was a part of the UN investigation that was conducted. And that it had not changed the dynamic of genocide for me even a little bit. And I think
that the way in which you said that to a lot of people sounded very, very dismissive. Especially to people who, had relatives who were perhaps murdered or taken away, or had felt that, the loss of life on that day.
So let me answer this question.
Traumatic for the Jewish community.
Let me ask you this question. Now that you know the broader context, do you feel as though, do you feel like you were maybe duped? I don't want to say duped, but that you saw this that was very clearly out of context. Does that change your opinion a little bit, or do you feel like I'm running defense?
I'm very much on the sort of. I've always been on the pro-Palestine side of this. I'm a left-leaning person, so I never looked at what I saw and said this is justification for blockade, genocide, anything like that. But I did see, I'm also a humanitarian, and I think that it's important when you're trying to solve a conflict or when you're trying to stop violence that you honestly say what happened. And what happened was,
I agree.
Murderous militants went in to a music festival and murdered hundreds of teenagers in cold blood, and often massacred and mutilated them in ways that we have on camera. And that is deeply traumatic to me. And I guess this was linking to a broader point that, yes, I understand this whole thing about there is context to this, and you can't just sort of suggest any violent action is justifiable against someone if they don't hold views you like. But this is endemic to the ideology.
Do you think I maintain that position?
Side, it doesn't.
But do you think I maintain that position? Do you think that I think that it was wholeheartedly justifiable?
I think certainly you haven't been very clear in your condemnations at times, and I've watched what you've said.
Okay.
It doesn't seem, for example,
I
in the course of your talk, you didn't mention what happened on October 7th once.
Yeah.
You mentioned it as the start of the conflict. You didn't mention...
I don't even think it's the start of the conflict. I actually, if you recall, started the conversation even before the inception of the State of Israel. There's a deliberate reason for why I did that, because I think it's important to understand the historical context in which violent resistance
There's no context for murdering hundreds of teenagers, is there?
I think
is there context for that?
Yes, I think
really?
There's always
is that something
context.
That can
just like
be
there's context.
Contextually justified?
I don't think it's a contextual justification. I think it's offering background and analysis. Analysis is not justification. I mean, this is a deliberative body, right? We're in a space for free speech and debate, and I think that this is actually ironically one of the things that I don't like about debate is that there is a woeful misinterpretation that exists in this space, and that especially when we talk about certain things like certain subjects that are very difficult to broach in an open and honest manner, I think a lot gets lost in the nuance. And I think you understand where I'm coming from when I talk about this, like that October 7 is, I've never said that October 7 is like the inception or the first stage in what has unfolded. I think that it's important to understand the context in which violent resistance has evolved whether it be Hamas or whether it be any militancy against like overarching oppressive colonial actions.
But I suppose what I'm saying to you is there's time for nuance, and there's also time to say something is unequivocally evil and something is unequivocally unjustifiable. And I'm wondering why you can say that correctly about the wealth of Israeli atrocities. But to actually fix this conflict and gain trust with people, you need to say that unequivocally about the murder of hundreds of teenagers at the Supernova Music Festival, their mutilation, and often their... I don't know why you can't say that.
I don't. First of all, in terms of using the language of mutilation, and also consistently saying that there is a contextual justification for it, I think the violence that states engage in, specifically an apartheid state, which you agree is Israel's an apartheid state. Okay, so the violence that an apartheid state engages in is oftentimes considered to be invisible. There is a tremendous number of documented, there's a tremendous number of speakers and media representatives that have actively communicated all of the violence that has unfolded on October 7. I myself have also maintained the position that any kind of violence against civilians is completely unjustifiable. But I think it's more productive to at least be a resilient voice that, especially in the West, that tries to explain that these aren't barbaric monsters, that these are horrifying atrocities that they did, right? But that it is not coming out of a place of this antiquated anti-Semitic tendencies, or that they wanted to go out and like do mass or any number of different ways in which people have, I think, in a very unhelpful way, tried to claim that there is no emancipatory ambition here, and that there is no valid interest in wanting to be rid of Israeli sovereignty.
Do you think that by invading the Gaza Strip, that they were not motivated by anti-Semitism, given the fact that they were murdering civilians indiscriminately?
Invading the Gaza Strip?
By invading from the Gaza Strip into Israel.
Yeah.
Do you think that they were not motivated by anti-Semitism, given that they were murdering citizens? No.
No.
That is remarkable.
No,
the entire logic of Hamas
I don't.
built on anti-Semitism.
No.
And if you don't recognise that, then you're never going to build any trust with the Jewish community. If you have people who are out there and suggesting that your people don't have a right to exist, the slogan of the Houthis, who you so admire, is death to the Jews.
I know, and I've been very critical of that as well.
Well,
I don't know if
critical enough not to platform somebody and call him a sexy pirate.
That person wasn't I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but that was a 19-year-old Yemeni teenager that was actually not associated with the Ansar Allah movement at all.
There is enormous debate about that, and it is highly unlikely he'd be fighting with them if he had no connections to them. And you were not mentioning that in the context of it.
He was not fighting with them. There is a lot that gets lost in the translation, and certainly I think a lot of commentary has existed in this space of a conversation that I had 10 months ago, or at this 11 months ago, before the Ansar Allah administration was even designated as an official state-sponsored terrorist organization. Joe Biden had actually taken them out of that classification that Donald Trump had put them in because of the fact that they were moving on, that the Saudi-Iranian normalization had taken place. And that person, the 19-year-old Yemeni teenager, I originally thought was a Houthi. And I'm very open about that.
And you were perfectly happy to give them a hang.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it would have been a very different conversation. But having said that, if you think that I would have, there were points in that conversation where I asked them directly, what do you think about Jewish people? What would you say if I were to tell you that there are a lot of Jewish people who are leading anti-Zionist protests in America? And his answer was very clear. And this is a person that has...
If you talked to an IDF soldier and they said, "Oh, I don't hate Palestinians," you would critically engage and examine that. But you do not critically engage and examine with this individual. And instead, you
because an
IDF
IDF soldier in many circumstances is living in similar conditions to someone like myself. So I treat someone in the Western world with Nazi ambitions very differently.
No, I think this is interesting because it suggests that you don't have a moral universalism. What I've heard from you is this very eloquent, and I agree with it, moral condemnation of the atrocities. But when we talk about the murder of gay people en masse in Yemen, when we talk about, for example, Tibet's oppression under China, or when we talk about what Hamas has done to gay people within there, or what they do to Jewish hostages, you enter this contextual blather. And it strikes me that these...
Because you want to know why? You want to know why? because Israel has killed significantly larger numbers of gay Palestinians than Hamas has. And that is precisely why I think it's a universally unproductive conversation to consistently talk about the many different moral failings, especially when I look at this with my own personal background, with the understanding that reactionary movements grow when there are outside forces that are invading a country. This is something that I actually talked about with respect to Ukraine as well, that while there were many movements within Ukraine that were constantly fighting against paramilitary groups that had started off as like offshoots of football hooligans, the Azov Brigade being one of them, that once Ukraine was invaded by Russia, that the inevitable violence was going to make all of the most right-wing reactionary forces the emancipatory forces that were going to dominate the country in perpetuity. We saw this with Iran. The destabilization of Iran, backed by the CIA, caused the Ayatollah to overtake the country, because in most circumstances, when Western forces or an outside force is coming into your country, you don't care about who is actually fighting back. You just want the pain to stop. You want the violence to end. And I examine this across the board in the exact same vein. When a larger, more powerful country meddles in the affairs of a smaller country, Iran. No matter how big or small. Yeah, Iran, exactly. Iran is a perfect example of this. I think that the Iranian destabilization and the implementation of the Shah regime is quite literally the reason why the Ayatollahs were able to gain momentum.
The intervention of Iran in the other powers, but in terms of the broader problem with that.
But do you understand where I'm coming from? Because there is universality there, and I think the universality is hard to grasp, especially if you've grown up in the United Kingdom, or if you've grown up in America. It's very difficult for people in the Western world to shed themselves of Western chauvinist frameworks and engage in, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but engage in what I have seen as pinkwashing by consistently talking about the internal dynamics of any kind of resistance group, when in fact we do not make those considerations for many of our allies, and it's not even something that is remotely brought up in this conversation as far as like universality goes. I've never heard anybody go, we got to stop giving Saudi Arabia weapons because of the horrifying treatment of gay people. I still think it's unjustifiable, just like it's unjustifiable in Yemen. But ultimately, the way I look at it, if there is a much larger, much more powerful country that is getting unlimited weapons from the most powerful country on the planet, and they are engaging in wholesale slaughter, I think analyzing or interpreting the dynamic of like Hamas and gay people in that regard is ultimately not only unproductive, but also it's not something that is within our realm of power even. I think that these countries, my country, Turkey, for example, will inevitably, once they have breathing room, have the time and opportunity to be able to advocate for their own civil liberties. Because at the end of the day, the gay people that Hamas could potentially harm are still gay Palestinians. Does that make sense? And we have the benefit of living in the UK or in the United States of America, where we have undergone this process of civil liberties and advocacy for civil liberties, and be able to overcome these issues, like the structural hurdles, the systematic discrimination that gay people face. Like, I mean, think about Alan Turing.
I think there are two issues. Sorry if I just could respond quickly.
If I could just say, you've been debating for a very long time, and by all means.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
No, it's fine.
I would love to sort of offer some of Cambridge Union's sort of fantastic hospitality, maybe trade British culture, maybe take you for a pint at the pub.
Sure. Can we film it? Can we still stream it?
We can film. We'll go to a pub, have a pint. You know, you've been debating for a very long time. I love debating as well. But
I hate debating.
Sorry.
That's I am not. A lot of people think I'm
a. Fair enough to debate about things in which you like fundamentally disagree.
Oh no, of course.
Like, you know, we don't get anywhere in society without doing that.
Sure, but there's a line of people too, so maybe be considerate.
We'll get back. Yeah.
We would love to.
Do you guys want to take photos?
Let's get some pics.
All right.
We'll take you.